Hey everyone, thank you for waiting. Sorry about that. Thank you for joining us today. Hey, why do I still hear the music?
I don't.
Well, I guess it just wanted me to hear the music a little bit longer. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the competitive landscape and how to consider it when you're getting ready to bid and during the bidding process. Because sometimes winning a bid involves a little bit more than counting assemblies and items and adding in the labor and considering your overhead and profits. So we'll hand it over to Brian here in just a minute to cover those elements. But first, I wanted to mention the chat over on the right. So feel free to chat any questions or comments during the webinar, and we'll answer them for you during the webinar. And also go ahead and like this video and feel free to subscribe and hit the bell to get more information about our future videos from us. You'll get alerts letting you know when we're getting ready to start or when we maybe posted a new video. And one little small thing, we also started posting YouTube shorts and if you can believe it, TikToks and Instagram Reels. So you might see us there once in a while. They're a lot shorter versions of this. And I twisted Brian's arm, and I think he's kind of enjoying the process of creating estimating tip short videos that are like 30 to 60 seconds. So it's a little bit of a new thing we're doing. Let's see how that works out for us. All right, Brian, you want to take it over?
Thank you, Derek. Competitive bidding is one of the most fascinating parts of electrical estimating to me because it kind of combines all of the number crunching. There's a whole lot of number crunching involved in estimating, not only in producing your bid, but tracking your bids and tracking your competitive bids. There's a whole lot of number crunching, but when it comes down to it, there's still a very subjective, it's really one of those things is much or more art than science. One of the things to first look at when you're doing a competitive bid is the number of people you're bidding against.
Brian,
Yes.
hate to interrupt you, but your shared monitor dropped.
Okay.
You need to reshare your monitor. I don't know, it was there. Maybe I scared it away with my spiel.
So I want to share.
And share your laptop monitor.
Are we good there?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay. So one of the first things to get some kind of a read on is the number of competitors you have that you're bidding against. A lot of the time you won't know. I understand that. Uh, Sometimes you're not bidding against anybody, or maybe just one other company. Uh, my rule of thumb, quite frankly, and I know people will disagree with me on this, is that anytime you're bidding against five or more other electrical contractors, it very well may not be worth your time. And I know people all the time that they bid against 8 or 10 other electrical contractors. And if you stop and think about it, the odds of winning are obviously not in your favor, but the odds of winning the bid are only going to be in your favor if you make a major mistake. So that's not the kind of bid you want to win. Now, how do you find out how many people you're bidding against? You can ask whoever asked you to bid the job. They may or may not have that information. They may or may not divulge it to you, but it's certainly appropriate to ask. You don't have to be obligated to bid against 10 other people, and they should understand that. It takes time and money to put together a bid, so they shouldn't be coercing you or trying to get you to bid against a whole lot of other companies. Another source is your suppliers, because if it's a job, which most jobs are, where you need to get a quote on the lighting or the gear, your suppliers will probably know who else is bidding the job. Uh, they may not tell you who they are, but they can at least tell you, oh, everybody in town's bidding it, or I haven't seen anybody else bidding it. So those are all indicators. And if nothing else, find out after the fact. If you've got a customer that's constantly asking you for bids, and after the bid you find out that they got 10 bids, they're always getting a lot of bids, then it's probably not worth your time. So try to make some assessment of the number of companies you're bidding against. The worst thing you'd want to do is be bidding against nobody and have a really tight bid with little or no profit. So it's part of the whole equation here when you're bidding competitively is to get some idea of how many people you're bidding against. Similar to that is the number of general contractors that you're bidding to. And again, if it's too many, you're bidding to several general contractors, and they're each getting 3 or 4 electrical bids, and maybe not the same companies. Then you're really in a situation against the odds. I know you can't always just bid to one general contractor, but it's not a situation you want to get into where there's 10 general contractors and they're each getting 5 electrical bids. That's just too many.
Hey,
Another fact.
hey,
Go ahead.
Brian, real quick. Sorry, your monitor dropped again. I wonder if there's like a shortcut key you're hitting first next slide because it seemed to drop right when you went to a new slide.
Maybe let me try again here.
Yeah. We know slides aren't that important, but it kind of helps solidify in what Brian's talking about
So you
a
see the
little
right
bit.
slide now?
I do.
Let me try going to the
There it
next one and
is.
make sure that it works.
Yeah. Yep. We're good.
Okay, let me go back to that one then. We're back on the original one now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
So similar to knowing how many electrical contractors you're bidding against is knowing the number of general contractors you're bidding to. And again, you don't want to get into a situation where you're submitting bids to a lot of general contractors, each of which may be getting several different electrical bids, and the odds again are just shaping up against you. The other thing you always want to be aware of is whether or not that general contractor might be shopping your bid. If all you're doing is producing the number 150,000, so he can go out and to his favorite electrical contractor and say, "Can you do that for under 150?" Then again, you're wasting your time. You're doing him a service, but that's not the kind of thing you want to get involved in. And again, it's hard to know if your bid's getting shopped, but again, you'll get a sense of it if you bid several times to the same general contractor and you don't seem to be getting any work. So look out for that. Be careful that your bid isn't getting shopped so that you're just providing a number to beat to one of your competitors. Another red flag for me when doing a competitive bid is the subcontracts on the job, especially if it's a large portion of the overall bid. If you're doing a $500,000 electrical bid and 250,000 of it is fire alarm, then a large portion of the job obviously is not your area. So you're really subject to the subcontractors' competitiveness. Again, you're vulnerable if they give other electrical contractors better pricing. So you just got to be watching out for all these things, and you're not always going to know. But again, the thing I worry about with a large subcontract is, let's say the fire alarm again is $250,000, and one of your competitors is getting a subcontract price from the same people for, or a different uh, customer for 150,000. Then you're not competitive, and it's totally out of your control. So it's a big red flag when there's a large portion of the job is being subcontracted. Now I've got a lot of customers these days who just, for that reason, partly they don't bid things like fire alarm. They just don't bid any portion of it. Not even the backbone conduit and boxes and all that. They just exclude it altogether from the bid. Leave it to the general contractor to go out and get a separate complete bid on the fire alarm. So that's one option, is just to exclude it from your bid. The opposite of that is to don't sub it out to somebody else. Do it in-house. If you have the capability of doing the fire alarm or the data, that portion of the job, rather than sub it out, do it in-house. At least you have control. You may not be as competitive or efficient at it as another subcontractor, but again, you're in control if you're doing it in-house. So there's a couple of options when you got a large subcontract bid, is just to exclude it altogether or do it in-house. Let's see if we can move to the next slide. A real important part of the competitive bid process, especially on the larger, more formal jobs where you're submitting a bid that has a deadline and has to be actually finalized and submitted by a certain date and time, is to provide a proposal or a scope of work. Even on a smaller job, I still think it's very important to provide a scope of work to whoever you're bidding it to. That scope should not only include a general description of what you're doing, the the lighting, the switch gear, the distribution, just the general description of the electrical portion of the job. But more importantly, it should include all of the pages that you're bidding from, all of the drawings with the dates. Now, inevitably, if you get selected as the low bidder and then 2 months or 4 months from now, and the job actually is ready to start up, there probably very likely have been changes to the job. So you need to make sure that the documents, the pages, the drawings you bid are what you're actually to going to be doing when you actually start the job. And if not, obviously you need to submit um, pricing and changes for the changes in the work from the time you bid it. Again, on a larger, more formal job, there will be specifications. Sometimes the specifications are within the actual pages, the prints of the job. On the larger jobs, there actually will be a book. It could be hundreds of pages long. But again, you want to notate the date of that spec book and the pages in the spec book that you're including in your bid. And again, of course, if there's any addendums, if excuse me, issued addendums, changes to the bid between the time you originally started and the time you submit the bid, list those addendums. Again, dates are real important. And exclusions. What aren't you including in your bid? Now, part of the reason to do this is that you don't want to spend a lot of hours and time producing a bid, and you get down to the final uh, bid date and time, and your general contractor is looking at 4 or 5 other bids, and they don't know the specifics of what you've got included or not included. So it's really important to have that scope letter so that they can compare apples and apples. If somebody has a lower price but they're not including something that you've included, then that's really important to finalizing your bid. Um, and another note on that: when you submit your proposal or your scope letter, if it's before the bid, and it should be before the bid, don't put the price on it. You can say price to uh, be forwarded or submitted before the actual bid date and time. But give them the scope letter, give them the proposal, at least enough ahead of time where they can review it and really know if they have any questions. They'll get those to you, but make sure that you give it to them ahead of time, and you don't need to give them the price until the final moment, the final uh, time right before the bid. Markup is obviously a big aspect of competitive bidding. Just from a simple point of view, if you lower your overhead and your profit, you've got a better chance of getting the bid. And the opposite, if you raise it, you have less of a chance of getting the bid. So the amount of overhead and profit, your markup that you put on the job is important. Um, and again, you should keep track of it. You should see what your results are. If you get enough data, you've got maybe a whole year's worth of bidding, and you see where you're ending up as far as your mark. Are you winning bids where you put more markup on, or how much does it affect your chances of success? Uh, you can just keep a simple spreadsheet with the amount of the bid and the amount of the markup. For that purpose, I would combine overhead and profit just to see what the overall markup is and how your chances of success are being affected. Sometimes it's just a gut feel, but again, you want to be thinking about that when you submit your final bid. Um, there are no right or wrong answers. If you bid to the same customer on 5 straight jobs and you get all of them, then you probably have some room to increase your markup. The traditional way to mark up a job, the most conventional way to do it, is to put a percentage for overhead and profit on the entire job. So if it's a $150,000 job and you add 15% overhead and 15% profit, it would be added to the actual prime cost. Another thing that comes into play, though, again, this would be applicable if something in the job is not typical. Like again, you've got a large subcontract, or you've got a large portion of the job is material or labor. In EBM, let's make sure we get this to the right screen, Derek. Are we on the EBM screen now?
Yep.
Okay. In the job totals, we have the option, which is down here, to put a markup or the overhead on the entire job as a percentage. Again, that's the most traditional, common way to do it. But a lot of people also use this option at the top here to apply it by category. So when you do that, you can put a percentage on quoted and non-quoted material. Maybe I'm only going to put 10% on that. And then on labor, we'll do it by percentage. You might want to do a higher markup. And on your direct job expenses, again, maybe a smaller markup. Same thing on tools, same thing on subcontracts. So you can play with these markups again to kind of compensate for the fact that you really want to make your money on labor. You want to compensate for the fact that if it's a large subcontract, you may not be able to mark it up as much as you would normally. And I've talked about this on other webinars. Another way to apply markup is to apply it as an hourly amount to labor. What you have to do there is figure out how much your labor cost is as a dollar amount per hour of labor per, let's say, per month. So if you've got $200,000 in overhead and you've got $400,000 in, I'm sorry, $200,000 in overhead and you've got 2,000 hours of hours in the field, you divide that into there and you come up with a number that's the dollar amount per hour for the to mark up just to recover your overhead based on your labor hours. Again, that's another topic we've got into a little more detail in another webinar, but and we can help you with that math if you want. But looking at your overhead related to your labor hours is a very valid way to do it.
Yeah, I'll put a link to it in the chat.
Okay. Are we back on the?
Yep.
Okay. So again, I mentioned already if it's a job where the owner is furnishing the lighting or the gear, that's going to tilt the job. That means you need to put more markup on your labor, whether you do it as a percentage or whether you do it as a dollar amount. You're still doing the same amount of work if they provide the lighting or the gear. You know, if it's going to take 5,000 hours and they're furnishing the fixtures, it's still going to be 5,000 hours that you have to manage and absorb the overhead on. So again, we can help you go through that calculation with putting the markup as a per hour figure. Okay, I think we just got some of the strategic considerations to take into account. Again, this is all very subjective stuff. It's just part of being aware of your.
We have a question if you want to kind of
ahead.
going back to the last one.
Okay.
Last slide. Labor overhead. Is this in addition to burden used on direct labor?
No, labor burden is part of your labor cost. So if you're paying an electrician, let's say $30 an hour, your labor burden would be the additional cost to the employer for payroll taxes, workers' comp, general liability, benefits. That's labor burden. This is just the amount it takes to recover the cost to run your business. That's how we typically define overhead, not burden. Burden is a direct cost. You've got to pay those taxes and benefits and insurances regardless of the amount of overhead the company has to recover. That's a good question. A lot of times those terms are kind of confused or not used accurately. Okay, so you might consider bidding a job aggressively. You might consider bidding it all together if you're trying to get into a new market or a new type of job. So that's a reason to take on a bid that you might not normally. Maybe it's a lot larger. Maybe it's a different type of job. Sometimes you need to bid jobs competitively just to keep employees busy. I know that's a really difficult decision to make, and sometimes you've got to just go ahead and bite the bullet. But you do need to keep your core field people busy. So if you're getting slow and you don't have a lot of work coming up, you may bid more competitively just because of that. The size of the job, I think, is a real important factor. The example I always give is I don't want to bid. Would I rather bid $10,000 jobs with a 20% markup or $100,000 job with a 20% markup? I'd rather have the $100,000 job because it's a lot less hassle, a lot less to manage than 10 little jobs. So the size of the job is relative, and typically, the larger the job, the more you will see your competitors lower their markup. And on the opposite end, the smaller the job, you don't want to do a small job that's difficult for a small markup. It's just not worth it, obviously. Part of that is finding your sweet spot. Where is it that your company does best? Over the years, I've seen lots of examples of companies that, maybe they've got 5 employees and they can really be competitive on $150 or $250,000 job. They're not big enough maybe to do a $2 million job, but they also maybe don't uh, do as well on a $5 or $10,000 job. So be aware of where your sweet spot is. See, as you track your jobs and look at your profit at the end of the job, see where you're doing best as far as the size of the job. Again, you can look at your past success with certain types of jobs. Um, again, I've got customers who really thrive on the industrial explosion-proof jobs, and they other customers who won't touch them because they're just too time-consuming and tedious. And finally, you might competitively bid more aggressively on a job to keep competitors away. Sometimes that's just the reality of the business world, is that you don't want your competitors getting their foot in the door if you've got a good customer you want to protect. All kinds of things to consider with competitive bidding. Like I said at the beginning, it's much more of it's at least as much of an art as it is a science. Finally, get the results. If they don't tell you, that you were not the winning bidder, then they have a obligation to tell you where your bid was, how many people bid it, and where your bid was, and from between the lowest and the highest bid. They don't necessarily need to give you every other competitor's bid, but you need to know if you're bidding against 5 other people and you're always the fifth one, then that's not a good situation for you. You either need to consider changing your markup, getting better pricing from your suppliers, or more productivity in the field, or something. You certainly don't want to be the low uh, or the highest bidder rather than the lowest bidder on a job. But get the results. And again, I've always said before, if they won't give you the results, that's not a good sign. I think they have an obligation to tell you where you stood in the bid, because it's your time for future bids that you have to decide if you're going to invest in. Don't see any more questions here.
Nope. Not at the moment.
So as I think Derek mentioned at the beginning, if you subscribe to you'll get all the information on our videos and the new shorts we're doing. Um, I do most of what I do is training, and I know we are reaching out to a lot of people with these videos, because I think every time I talk to somebody, I usually do at least a couple training sessions a day. They all mention, "Oh, I've seen your videos on YouTube and all that." So it's definitely a great way to get education, get some input on different aspects of the business, and all I'm doing is feeding in the information that people have given me over the years. Again, whether it's a 5 employee company or a 250 employee company, I've had the benefit of getting input from all those different levels of users, as well as people that do different types of work.
Yep. Yeah, I think you said it well. Yeah, so go ahead and subscribe, hit the button, hit the bell, or whatever you have to do to get more updates from us via YouTube. Otherwise, we'll still send you an email and let you know typically. Um, it- I guess we should mention that we're going to be in NECA coming up soon here at Philadelphia.
Yep, Nika's in Philadelphia at the end of September. um, I think it's a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, the last Saturday of September. And then we'll also be at the IEC show in Dallas in the middle of October. You can get those dates up our website.
Right. Off our website, or just Google them, I suppose. But I just wanted to mention, Brian, we have some questions here before we
Okay.
wind things down, or make people think we're winding things down. All right. So the first one is, can you advise me on when I bid the job for my regular GC? Should I send the quote to others? To others unknown. I'm not sure what that means exactly.
And again, I'm not sure there's a totally right or wrong answer to that. You've kind of got to use your judgment. I presume you're looking at, you've got a general contractor who you've done work with and you've got a relationship with. Should you submit a bid to the others? I would say mostly yes, unless there's a reason not to. Um, you don't have to give them the same price. Um, that may be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes if they find out that you gave them a higher price than you did another customer. But I would generally say, if you're going to spend the time to put the bid together, I would submit it to the other general contractors. Otherwise, obviously you don't have a chance of getting the bid with them. The more formal sealed bids, they have to list the subcontractor that they are going to use. So that's part of the actual process of awarding the bid is is the choice of the subcontractors who the general contractors are going to use.
All right. 60 wire, let us know if you have a follow-up for that. We have another here.
I see the one about service prices versus large construction. I think that goes back to my point about small jobs versus large jobs. Service jobs are typically small jobs. So you got to have a lot of markup in those. And that's a mistake I see people make all the time. I train people who've really kind of got their heads into the bidding world, and they're used to markups are 10 or 15, 20% per overhead and 10 or 15% per profit. You can't run a service business on that kind of margin. You've got to have a much higher markup in your material and your labor. Now, the trick there sometimes is that the hourly rate may be something that's very sensitive or something that you have to live within your competitors. But you probably have a little more margin, a little more flexibility on the material side of it. So one or the other, you've got to make a much higher markup on material and or labor if you're doing service jobs. So yes, there is a difference.
Okay. 60 wire said, never had a job from the others. Back to the submitting the bid to the other generals.
Yeah. Again, it might be just worth it to do it to have the opportunity to follow up. Maybe there's a relationship there that is is open. Maybe they're not real happy with whoever they're is doing most of their electrical work. At least you open up the communication by following up and asking where you were on the bid. Um, Nothing wrong with that.
Back to the, sorry, we're jumping between questions here. Service prices versus large construction. Is there an hourly difference? There's the follow-up comment from Outlier Power Services. Or a difference in my labor rate when I'm bidding service versus large construction.
Yeah, that's what I'm just talking about. You're going to charge much more per hour for a service job than you would. Um, it's not that your cost is different for an hour, but you've got to mark up your labor more for service work. So if your labor cost is $50 an hour with your burden and all that, you can't. You might have to charge at least $100 an hour or more on a service job where you might mark up your labor only 20 to 25% on a competitive bid. So yes, there's an hourly difference. I guess part of the problem there is I don't look at the hourly rate on a bid as I normally like to look at it before the markup. I want to know what my cost is per hour with my burden, and then we put the overhead and profit on in the end. Service work is kind of the opposite. We tell the customer it's $100 an hour, and we just have to know that we've got enough margin in there to cover our costs. Yeah, they're entirely different worlds.
Okay, a little bit of a different subject. Do we have to use Plan Swift, or can we use other software, or what is compatible?
As far as integrating with EBM, it's either Plan Swift or on-screen takeoff. Probably 90% of our users right now are on Plan Swift because of the integration is really nice. But you can use any method you want to do a takeoff. We've got people that use Bluebeam, people that do manual takeoffs, and then you plug them into the bid manually. The advantage of using Plan Swift is that they're integrated. When you take off a 150-foot feeder, it puts the 150 foot into EBM. You don't have to type it in. If you take off a 100 receptacles, it puts the 100 receptacles in without you having to manually key it in. So that's a significant advantage. But again, we do have people that do things manually that use other electronic takeoff tools, and then they just manually key in the results. I see a customer who says we do not mark up labor as we would never get the job. I couldn't disagree with that more. What are you selling? as an electrical contractor. It's your labor. Everybody is going to get plus or minus a very comparable number on material, and more so than you might even think. I know, again, electrical contractors with 5 employees that buy darn near close to the same levels as electrical contractors with 50 employees. Wholesale is wholesale. You're going to get some price breaks if it's a big job, uh, but you have to mark up labor. Absolutely.
Well,
Why would you do a job if you're not going to make some money on the labor?
uh, maybe they're marking up other things higher to make up for it, or
I I assume so, but I don't think that's a good strategy.
sure.
Um, Again, because you're not selling material, you're just turning it over. You're picking it up and putting it in, but it's the expertise of your electricians, the efficiency of your electricians, the efficiency of how well you run the business and manage those electricians that's important,
Hmm.
not the fact that you may be able to shop around and save 2% on your material.
Yeah, the pre-comment to that was, do you feel it best to charge less for apprentice than journeyman, or just $75 across the board?
But again, you want to figure out what your composite rate is. If your crew has 5 apprentices and 5 electricians, you can do the math to figure out what your uh, composite rate is when you mix that together. That's really the main thing that's important. So by definition, you are charging less for an apprentice. Uh, on service work, maybe not though. A lot of companies charge out their apprentices at the same hourly rate as they do their journeymen. Um, Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Hmm. Okay. Uh, we have a question about, do you plan to integrate EBM with Mac M1? You know, I'll answer this and you can fill in blanks, Brian, if I miss something. But the current dilemma with the M1 processor is Microsoft's SQL server, which is a fairly standard enterprise level database system that we use. Unfortunately, it doesn't install on M1 processors. They've chosen not to support, I guess, it's ARM based processors, at least for now. We do have some customers that use Macs, but then they host a Windows desktop in the cloud, like through a service like v2cloud.com, or Microsoft has, I think it's called Windows 365 or something like that, where you can rent a Windows virtual machine in the cloud for, like, I don't remember, it's like $40 a month. And you can install whatever you want up there. And then it's just, you use it through your browser pretty much on a Mac. Uh, we, we currently don't have any plans of switching away from the Microsoft SQL database, but we're, trust me, we're definitely looking at our options for the future. We do have enough people that come at us with that question where we're paying attention, but it just doesn't make sense for the small number of people that do ask when there are virtualization options available. I know it's an additional cost, but that's where we're at right now. Back to James Stevens' question about um, the marking up labor. He says, my composite rate is 36.82 is what he said.
And again, that's going to be different for every
Hmm.
electrical contractor. It'll depend on the hourly rates that they pay their employees. It depends on the various aspects of the burden. Some companies pay no benefits. Some companies have a very comprehensive benefit package. But that should all be included in your composite rate, and you need to average that out over your crew that gets paid different rates. You typically pay a journeyman obviously more than an apprentice, and probably pay a foreman more than a journeyman. So that's the kind of thing you need to look at and see, you know, historically, or at least over the last few months, what percentage of your electricians are getting journeyman pay, foreman pay, apprentice pay, and then you can figure out the composite rate from that. But if you know your composite rate, you're probably at least a half a step of a lot of people, because when I do initial training with people, they haven't really thought about that. And I think it's a real critical thing. Why spend so much time figuring out the cost of the material if you don't know the cost of your labor? Um, you got to have both sides of the equation. Uh, they both need to be accurate to put together a bid.
Hmm. Can you define composite rate, Brian?
So the composite rate is the average based on the percentage of hours that are allocated to the different categories. Let me show you an EVM, actually. That's a better way to
Right.
do it. So we have a setup screen here.
Because it depends on the job, right?
No, well, you could adjust it for the job, but typically you have an overall composite rate that would reflect
Most jobs.
most jobs.
Okay.
So under direct labor rates here, in this example, we've got 50% of the hours are journeyman, 50% are helper. If I wanted to put a foreman into this, I'd have to adjust it by, oops, taking hours out of the others because it has to add up to 100%. So and factored into that is the base rate, the average in this case for the journeyman, the average for the helper, and the average for the foreman. And then added to that is the burden. That can be done as a dollar amount or as a percentage. And most people do it as a percentage, but again, it includes federal and state payroll taxes, the portion that's paid by the employer, includes workers' comp, it includes general liability, and it includes benefits. That's the one that's going to have the biggest variability. And so that 35% is not a number I would just take, for granted.
Mhm.
I would do the research, the homework with your bookkeeper, accountant, and get a good handle on that. It's relatively easy to figure out the average of what you pay the different categories. And then the composite rate is the reflection of the different total number of hours that are being allocated in the field. And again, you can adjust these for a particular job. Maybe on a particular job, you don't need as many journeymen. You might bump up the helper percentage and bump down the journeyman percentage, and it'll adjust. The composite rate is this number down here at the bottom, the 3470. That's the average cost of an hour of labor with burden based on that particular crew.
Yep. So pretty close to what James Stevens had, right?
Yeah, and that's probably not too far off. Again, national averages are be careful. We know that
Sure.
labor varies a lot more geographically than material. Uh, and then you've also got to figure in union versus non-union versus the kind of work you're doing. You're not going to pay a 10-year journeyman electrician doing industrial work the same thing you do a commercial electrician who's got a just barely out of his apprenticeship.
Right. Yeah. Oh, he corrected himself. It's 3750 is his.
Okay.
But all right. Good questions. I don't think I missed any. Nope. I think we're good.
All right.
We do have training coming up in Baltimore in what is that, October?
Yeah, right after the Nika show.
Right after the NICA show in Baltimore. Brian will be doing in-person training in a classroom.
In a
So if
classroom.
that's your thing, this is a perfect time to do it. We don't do a lot of in-person trainings due to costs and various other logistical issues now. But we do try to do them around the trade shows. And then I think you're going to be in Dallas later in October.
For classrooms, we're doing those in Austin. We'll be at the trade show
Austin.
in Dallas.
Right.
And then we're going to be doing classes in Austin right after that. I also do a lot of on-site training. Quite frankly, that's my favorite thing to do because I get the opportunity to customize the training to exactly what that company needs: small, medium, large, all the different variables that come into place, experienced, non-experienced, and um, I I do quite a bit of those.
Yep. Make sure that all your software is set up correctly, all your database is working efficiently for you. I don't know. You do a bunch of things when you're on site. That's
And my
just
my main goal is to make sure that all the estimators and our project managers know the quickest, easiest, most efficient way to get their estimate into the system.
yeah.
Because I guarantee if I give 10 different estimators a job to bid, they're all going to do it 10 different ways. And they're not all, it's not all right or wrong, but there's definitely some, not rules, but, best practices that'll help you make
Right.
you more efficient.
So we have another question here. How do you add exclusions of work to a proposal printout.
Not sure I understand that. A typical proposal. Let me see if I can pull one up quickly.
If there isn't a section, you can add it, I believe.
Right. So we have a couple of templates built into the system for proposals or scope letters. And of course, you can add to these. You can change the master template, or you can change it just for the job.
Yeah, they're just RTF Word files.
So your exclusions would be a list like this. And again, this is just the master template. So you would look at this and delete things that aren't appropriate, edit things that aren't appropriate, and add things. So it's just a document that you can either adjust the master template or you can adjust it just for the job. So those are the kind of things you would typically see on a list of exclusions.
Yep. That makes sense to me.
And again, it's just a document. It's just a document that you can either edit in the program or you can bring it into Microsoft Word and edit it, or any word processing program and do the edit.
Right. The template RTF file, right, which is in the EBM install folder.
It's kind of a universal format.
And then EBM feeds in variables or values from your bid into the document when you go to create your proposal.
It's going to plug in information that you put into the job.
Yeah. All right, I think we covered everything. So I guess be on the lookout for our new electrical estimating tips, YouTube shorts and TikToks and Instagrams, and it'll be Brian will be the star of those videos going forward. And otherwise, thank you for all the great questions. This is good interactivity. We love it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
More the merrier. So have a good day and a good, hopefully, holiday weekend for everyone.
Thank you.